Marcus Wellington stood in the airport terminal, watching his private jet taxi away without him. His wife clutched their crying daughter while security surrounded them. The flight attendant's smug smile haunted him. She had no idea she'd just kicked the airline's owner off his own plane. Everything would change tomorrow. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and revenge, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking true stories that will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when this powerful CEO decides to fight back against discrimination. Let's get started. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Wellington family's Beverly Hills mansion as Marcus Wellington adjusted his casual polo shirt in the mirror. At 42, this successful tech entrepreneur had built an empire that most people could only dream of. But today he looked like any other father preparing for a family vacation. "Daddy, are we really going to see the ocean?" 8-year-old Zoe bounced excitedly on her parents' king-sized bed, her natural curls bouncing with each movement. Her designer backpack was already packed with her favorite books and an expensive tablet that could keep her entertained for hours. Dr. Samantha Wellington, a renowned pediatric surgeon, smiled as she folded their clothes into matching designer luggage. "Yes, sweetheart. Martha's Vineyard has some of the most beautiful beaches you've ever seen." She glanced at her husband with loving eyes. "I can't believe we're actually taking this trip. When was the last time we had 2 weeks completely disconnected from work?" Marcus chuckled, though his mind was already racing with the dozens of business decisions that would need his attention. What Samantha didn't know was that her husband owned Skyline Airways through a complex network of shell companies. A secret he'd kept for 2 years since purchasing the struggling airline. He'd grown up in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, where his grandmother had cleaned office buildings at night to put food on their table. Every success in his life had been earned through relentless determination and brilliant business instincts. "That's exactly why we're flying commercial instead of taking the jet," Marcus said, kissing his wife's forehead. "I want us to experience travel like a normal family. Sometimes I think we get too isolated in our bubble of privilege." The irony wasn't lost on him that they'd be flying on his own airline, though none of his employees knew his true identity. Marcus had deliberately maintained this anonymity to observe how his company operated without the artificial politeness that his presence would create. He'd built his tech empire by understanding user experience from the ground up, and he applied the same philosophy to his airline investment. Their private car service arrived precisely on time, a sleek black SUV that whispered of wealth without shouting it. As they drove through the morning traffic toward LAX, Marcus found himself studying every detail of their journey. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was research. He wanted to understand exactly what his passengers experienced from the moment they left home until they reached their destination. "Marcus, you're doing that thing again," Samantha teased, noticing how her husband was taking mental notes of everything around them. "You promised this would be a real vacation. No work, no analyzing, no business strategies." "You're right," he laughed, pulling his daughter closer as she played games on her tablet. "From now on, I'm just Dad." But even as he said it, Marcus couldn't turn off the part of his brain that had made him successful. He noticed things others missed, patterns that revealed deeper truths about how systems worked or failed. Zoe looked up from her tablet with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy, will the airplane have movies? And can I have apple juice?" Her excitement was infectious, reminding her parents why family time was so precious. In their demanding careers, moments like these were rare treasures. As they approached the airport, Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride. Skyline Airways had grown significantly under his ownership, expanding routes and improving service ratings. He'd invested millions in new aircraft, upgraded terminals, and enhanced training programs. On paper, everything looked perfect. Today, he'd find out if the reality matched his expectations. The morning was perfect for flying, with clear skies, stretching endlessly above Los Angeles. Marcus had specifically chosen to travel during peak hours to see how his airline handled the pressure of busy travel periods. Their first-class tickets were legitimate, purchased through normal channels without any special treatment. Today, The Wellington family would be just another set of passengers, experiencing every aspect of commercial travel like millions of others. "I love you both so much," Marcus whispered, watching his wife and daughter share a private joke about something on Zoe's tablet. "This is going to be the perfect vacation." He had no idea that in just a few hours, his faith in his own company would be shattered, and his family would face humiliation that would change everything. The gleaming terminals of LAX bustled with typical morning energy as the Wellington family made their way through the maze of travelers, rolling luggage, and departure announcements. Marcus instinctively guided his family toward the Skyline Airways terminal, feeling a subtle surge of ownership pride that he couldn't share with anyone. The first-class check-in line was notably shorter than the economy sections, but as they approached the counter, Marcus noticed something that made his business instincts sharpen. The ticket agent, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a name tag reading Brenda, looked up from her computer screen with an expression that seemed to shift the moment she saw them. "Excuse me," Brenda said, her tone carrying a subtle edge that hadn't been there when she'd helped the White family ahead of them. "Are you certain you're in the correct line? Economy check-in is over there." She pointed toward the much longer lines with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus felt Samantha tense beside him, but he maintained his calm demeanor. "We're checking in for first class," he replied politely, extending their printed boarding passes. "Flight 743, to Boston, then connecting to Martha's Vineyard." Brenda's eyebrows raised as she examined their tickets with far more scrutiny than she'd given previous passengers. She turned the papers over, held them up to the light, and even called over her supervisor for a second opinion. "These seat assignments seem unusual," she muttered, typing rapidly on her keyboard. "Are you sure these weren't upgraded by mistake?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Behind them, other first-class passengers began to form a line, some checking their watches impatiently. Marcus noticed how several of them observed his family with curious expressions, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense to them. "There's no mistake," Samantha said firmly, her medical training giving her voice an authority that most people respected. "We purchased these tickets 3 weeks ago through your website. Everything was confirmed yesterday." After what felt like an eternity, Brenda processed their boarding passes with obvious reluctance. "You'll need to go through security over there," she said, pointing toward the standard checkpoint rather than the expedited line typically used by first-class passengers. "And make sure you arrive at the gate at least 45 minutes early. Sometimes there are complications with certain reservations." The security checkpoint proved to be another test of patience. Despite their first-class status, a TSA agent named Kevin selected them for additional screening that seemed far more thorough than what other passengers experienced. "Nice watch," Kevin commented as Marcus placed his expensive timepiece in the security bin. "Must be nice to afford things like that. What kind of work do you do?" The question felt loaded with implications. Marcus owned companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but he simply replied, "Technology consulting." He watched as Kevin examined every item in their carry-on bags with meticulous attention, taking apart Zoe's tablet case and questioning the necessity of Samantha's medical supplies. "Daddy, why is the man being so careful with our stuff?" Zoe whispered, her innocent question cutting through the tension like a knife. Other passengers in nearby lines had begun to stare, some openly, others with sidelong glances that suggested they were witnessing something unusual. "He's just doing his job, sweetheart," Marcus replied, though his jaw tightened as Kevin subjected Samantha's purse to a search that bordered on harassment. The agent questioned every credit card, every piece of identification, and even suggested that some of their belongings might need additional inspection. Finally cleared through security, the family made their way to the gate area. Marcus used this time to observe his airline's operations with growing concern. He noticed subtle patterns in how staff interacted with different passengers, small variations in service that created vastly different experiences depending on factors that had nothing to do with ticket class or airline status. At the gate, passengers were already gathering for their flight. Marcus recognized the familiar mix of business travelers, families, and vacation goers that made commercial aviation profitable. But he also noticed something else. The way conversation seemed to pause when his family approached. How empty seats remained vacant even when other areas were crowded. A gate agent was making announcements about boarding procedures when Marcus spotted her. Senior flight attendant Patricia Whitmore stood near the boarding door, her 15 years of experience evident in the way she surveyed passengers with the critical eye of someone who'd seen everything. Her uniform was immaculate, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her expression suggested she took her authority very seriously. Patricia's gaze lingered on the Wellington family longer than on other passengers. Marcus watched as she whispered something to a colleague, both women glancing in their direction with expressions that seemed to communicate some shared understanding. He felt a chill of recognition, the same feeling he'd had in business negotiations, when he sensed an opponent preparing for conflict. "Marcus," Samantha whispered, "are you noticing what I'm noticing? The way people are looking at us? The extra questions? This doesn't feel normal." Before he could respond, the boarding announcement began. "We'll now begin boarding our first-class passengers and those requiring special assistance." Patricia's voice carried clearly across the gate area, professional and efficient. But as Marcus approached the boarding line with his family, her demeanor shifted dramatically. "Excuse me," Patricia said, stepping directly into their path with a smile that seemed more like a challenge. "I need to see your boarding passes again. There have been some issues today with people trying to board in the wrong group." Her eyes focused on Marcus with unmistakable suspicion. "People like you always seem to think the rules don't apply to them." The boarding area suddenly felt like a spotlight was shining directly on the Wellington family, as Patricia Whitmore examined their boarding passes with the intensity of a detective investigating a crime. Other first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably, in line behind them, and Marcus could feel dozens of eyes watching this unexpected drama unfold. "These seat assignments," Patricia said, holding their boarding passes up to the light as if looking for signs of forgery, "seem highly irregular. First class is a premium service, and we need to ensure that only qualified passengers are seated in that section." Her voice carried just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear every word. Samantha stepped forward, her medical training giving her a natural authority that most people respected. "Qualified passengers, we purchased these tickets with our credit card 3 weeks ago. Everything was confirmed through your airline's own system." Her voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the anger building in her eyes. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration," Patricia replied with condescending sweetness, "but these tickets could have been upgraded illegally, or there might be some mistake in the system. We see this kind of thing all the time with certain passengers who try to get seats they haven't properly paid for." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt his daughter's small hand grip his own more tightly as she sensed the growing tension. Other passengers began to murmur among themselves, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming an incident. "I'm calling my supervisor," Patricia announced, waving over a ground supervisor named Tom Bradley, whose weathered face and tired eyes suggested he'd dealt with similar situations before. "Tom, we've got another situation here. These passengers claim to have first-class EO seats, but something doesn't seem right about their documentation." Tom examined their boarding passes with the same suspicious scrutiny, shaking his head slowly. "Yeah, I see what you mean, Patricia. These seat assignments do look unusual. And with all the issues we've been having lately with fraudulent upgrades," he let the sentence hang unfinished, allowing others to draw their own conclusions. Marcus felt his phone buzzing in his pocket with what he knew were urgent business calls about airline operations, but Patricia immediately noticed the device. "Sir, phones need to be turned off during boarding procedures. That's a federal aviation regulation." She wasn't entirely correct, but her authoritative tone made most passengers assume she was right. An elderly white woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had been watching the exchange with growing disgust, finally spoke up. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I've been flying for 60 years, and I've never seen passengers treated this way. These people have done nothing wrong." Her voice shook with indignation. Patricia's response was swift and sharp. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but airline security is not a democracy. We have protocols for dealing with suspicious passengers, and I'm following those protocols exactly as I've been trained." She turned back to Marcus with renewed aggression. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify these tickets through additional channels." The verification process seemed designed to maximize humiliation rather than actually confirm anything. Patricia made phone calls that could have been completed in minutes, but somehow stretched into lengthy conversations filled with knowing looks and whispered comments. Meanwhile, other first-class passengers boarded around them, some offering sympathetic glances while others seemed to accept Patricia's narrative that something illegitimate was happening. "Daddy," Zoe whispered, her 8-year-old voice barely audible above the boarding announcements. "Why is the lady being mean to us? Did we do something wrong?" Her innocent question pierced through all the adult posturing and revealed the cruel reality of what was happening. Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people make mistakes about other people. But we haven't done anything wrong, and everything will work out fine." Even as he said it, Marcus was beginning to doubt his own words. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something far more systematic and deliberate. Patricia returned from her consultations with an expression of false regret. "I'm afraid there's been a problem with your reservations. The system shows some irregularities that we need to investigate further. For security reasons, I'm going to have to ask you to accept alternative seating arrangements in our economy section." "Alternative seating?" Samantha's voice rose with disbelief. "We paid for first-class tickets. We have confirmed reservations. You can't just arbitrarily change our seats because you've decided we don't belong there." The confrontation was attracting attention from throughout the gate area. Passengers from other flights began to stop and watch, some recording the incident on their phones while others whispered among themselves about what they were witnessing. Marcus realized this moment would define not just their vacation, but potentially their family's faith in justice itself. What would you do if you were in Marcus's position right now? Would you reveal your identity to stop this humiliation, or would you continue fighting for justice as a regular passenger? Comment number 1 if you think Marcus should stay silent and let this play out, or comment number 2 if you believe he should use his power immediately. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe because what happens next will absolutely shock you. But first, let me ask you this. How far do you think Patricia will push this situation before she realizes she's made the biggest mistake of her career? The boarding process had become a public spectacle as Patricia Whitmore's power trip reached new heights of cruelty. After 20 minutes of verification, she finally allowed the Wellington family to board the aircraft, but Marcus immediately realized their ordeal was far from over. "I'm afraid there's been a computer error with your seat assignments," Patricia announced as they entered the first-class cabin. "Those seats have been given to other passengers who arrived later. It's our policy to accommodate passengers in order of check-in time, and unfortunately, your delayed boarding process means your original seats are no longer available." Marcus looked toward their assigned seats and saw a white family with 2 teenage children settling comfortably into the exact spots where his family should have been sitting. The father caught his eye and shrugged apologetically, but made no move to give up the seats. "We were told these were our upgraded seats," the man said quietly. "The gate agent said there had been some kind of mistake with the original passengers." The injustice was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia had orchestrated this entire scenario, creating a problem that didn't exist, and then using that manufactured crisis to justify moving his family to inferior accommodations. Marcus felt his business instincts screaming that this was exactly the kind of systematic discrimination that destroyed companies from within. "This is unacceptable," Samantha said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions in operating rooms. "We have confirmed first-class reservations. We've paid first-class prices, and we're entitled to first-class service. Moving us to economy because of your manufactured delays is discrimination, plain and simple." Patricia's response was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but calling this discrimination is completely inappropriate. We're offering you comparable seating in our premium economy section, which is really quite comfortable. Many passengers actually prefer it because it's less formal than first class." The word formal carried clear implications about who belonged in first class and who didn't. Marcus watched other passengers' reactions carefully, noting how some seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, while others appeared to accept Patricia's narrative that some kind of legitimate correction was taking place. Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the cockpit, his silver hair and distinguished appearance lending authority to whatever position he chose to take. Marcus felt a moment of hope that a senior official might restore sanity to this situation, but that hope was quickly crushed. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Hayes asked, but his question was directed at Patricia rather than the family who had been wronged. His tone suggested he already knew whose version of events he would support. "Captain, we have passengers who are refusing to accept alternative seating arrangements after their original seats were found to have booking irregularities," Patricia explained smoothly. "They're becoming increasingly aggressive and uncooperative despite our attempts to accommodate them reasonably." The word aggressive was carefully chosen. Marcus had maintained perfect composure throughout the entire ordeal, but Patricia was now creating a narrative that painted him as a threat. In her version of events, asking for the seats they had paid for became aggressive, and requesting fair treatment became uncooperative. Captain Hayes studied Marcus with the kind of assessment that reduced human beings to potential problems to be managed. "Sir, I'm going to need you to cooperate with my crew's instructions. Flight safety requires that all passengers follow crew member directions without argument. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to involve airport security." The threat was clear and devastating. Marcus realized he was trapped in a no-win scenario where defending his family's rights would be interpreted as proof that he was indeed the problem passenger Patricia claimed he was. Meanwhile, accepting this treatment would mean teaching his 8-year-old daughter that sometimes you have to accept injustice because fighting it is too dangerous. Young flight attendant Jessica Martinez watched the entire exchange with obvious discomfort, but she remained silent. Marcus could see in her eyes that she knew what was happening was wrong, but Patricia's 15 years of seniority and reputation for retaliating against subordinates who challenged her authority kept Jessica from speaking up. The family was eventually escorted to 3 middle seats in the economy section, enduring the walk of shame through first class, while other passengers stared and whispered. Some seemed sympathetic, but most appeared to accept that some kind of legitimate correction was taking place. After all, if airline officials were taking these actions, there must be a good reason. As they settled into seats that were dramatically smaller and less comfortable than what they had paid for, Zoe looked up at her father with confusion and sadness. "Daddy, why did we have to move? Are we not allowed to sit in the nice seats?" Her innocent question contained a lifetime of potential damage to her self-worth and her understanding of how the world treated people who looked like her. Marcus's phone continued buzzing with urgent calls about airline operations, but Patricia confiscated the device, claiming it was a safety violation during boarding. The irony was excruciating. He was being prevented from conducting the business of running the very airline that was discriminating against him, while employees who didn't know his identity discussed him as if he were a problem to be solved rather than a human being deserving of dignity. Samantha's purse was subjected to another aggressive search, with Patricia claiming that some of her medical supplies looked suspicious and might need additional screening. The respected pediatric surgeon was forced to explain and justify every item in her bag, while other passengers watched this public humiliation unfold. "These medical credentials," Patricia said, examining Samantha's hospital identification, "look unusual. Are you sure these are legitimate? We've had problems before with people claiming to be medical professionals when they're not." The accusation was so outrageous that several passengers gasped audibly. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had defended them earlier, stood up from her first-class seat and marched back to economy. "This is absolutely disgraceful. I've never seen anything like this in my 60 years of flying. You people should be ashamed of yourselves." But Patricia was undeterred. If anything, the criticism seemed to embolden her, as if proving that she was willing to stand up to pressure demonstrated her commitment to airline security. She had created a narrative where she was the hero protecting innocent passengers from some undefined threat, and she was determined to see that story through to its conclusion. Marcus realized he was witnessing exactly what minority passengers had been complaining about for years in customer service reports he'd read, but somehow not fully understood. The systematic nature of the discrimination. the way multiple employees coordinated to support each other's biased decisions, and the institutional protection that allowed this behavior to continue unchecked. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus faced an agonizing decision. He could reveal his identity and end this nightmare immediately. But doing so would mean his family never got to experience justice as ordinary passengers. It would also mean that Patricia and others like her would never face consequences for their actions because they'd be too busy covering their tracks once they knew who he really was. The aircraft was nearly ready for departure when Patricia Whitmore decided that her campaign of humiliation hadn't gone far enough. What had started as discriminatory treatment was about to escalate into something that would haunt the Wellington family forever and create consequences that Patricia couldn't possibly imagine. "Excuse me," Patricia announced, approaching their economy seats with an expression of manufactured concern. "I've received complaints from first-class passengers about noise levels coming from this section, specifically about your daughter being disruptive during boarding procedures." Marcus looked at Zoe, who had been sitting quietly in her middle seat, reading a book on her tablet with headphones on. She hadn't spoken above a whisper since they'd been forced to move, and her behavior had been exemplary throughout the entire ordeal. The accusation was so transparently false that even nearby economy passengers began shaking their heads in disbelief. "My daughter has been completely silent," Samantha replied, her medical training helping her maintain clinical precision even under extreme stress. "She's been reading with headphones on since we sat down. What specific noise are you referring to?" Patricia's response revealed the true depths of her bias and cruelty. Children from certain backgrounds often don't understand appropriate airplane behavior. "For the comfort and safety of our first-class passengers, I'm going to need to separate your family. The child will need to sit in a different section where her natural tendencies won't disturb other passengers." The euphemisms were thinly veiled racism that made several passengers gasp audibly. Patricia was suggesting that Zoe was inherently disruptive because of her race, and that separating an 8-year-old from her parents was a reasonable solution to a problem that existed only in Patricia's prejudiced imagination. "You are not separating me from my daughter," Marcus said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made other passengers turn to listen. "She's 8 years old, she's done nothing wrong, and your suggestion is both illegal and unconscionable." For the first time during the entire ordeal, Patricia seemed to sense that she might have pushed too far. But instead of backing down, she doubled down with the desperation of someone who had invested too much in her narrative to admit she was wrong. "Sir, your aggressive tone and refusal to cooperate with crew instructions is exactly the kind of behavior we're trained to watch for," Patricia announced loudly enough for most of the cabin to hear. "I'm calling for backup to have you removed from this aircraft for the safety of other passengers." The word aggressive was weaponized again, but this time Patricia had made a critical error. She was describing a man who had maintained perfect composure throughout 90 minutes of systematic harassment as aggressive, simply because he refused to let her separate him from his child. The transparent injustice was becoming obvious even to passengers who had initially given Patricia the benefit of the doubt. Ground security officers Johnson and Martinez boarded the aircraft, their presence adding an official weight to Patricia's accusations. But Marcus noticed something crucial. Officer Johnson, an African-American man in his 40s, immediately seemed uncomfortable with the situation he was being asked to handle. "Ma'am, what exactly is the problem here?" Officer Johnson asked. "Patricia." But his eyes were studying the Wellington family with the experienced gaze of someone who had seen real troublemakers and knew this wasn't one of those situations. Patricia launched into an elaborate fabrication that grew more detailed with each telling. According to her latest version, Marcus had been verbally aggressive toward crew members, Samantha had refused to comply with safety regulations, and Zoe had been disrupting first-class passengers with loud and inappropriate behavior. Officer Martinez, who was Hispanic and seemed equally skeptical, asked for specifics. "Can you point to any witnesses who can confirm these behaviors? Are there any recordings or documentation of these incidents?" The question exposed the fundamental weakness in Patricia's position. Multiple passengers had been recording the incident, but their videos would contradict rather than support her claims. She had no witnesses because the behavior she described had never occurred. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly white woman who had defended the family earlier, rose from her first-class seat and marched toward the security officers with the determination of someone who had seen enough injustice for one day. "Officers, I've been watching this entire situation unfold, and I can tell you that this flight attendant is lying through her teeth," Mrs. Henderson declared with the kind of moral authority that comes from 8 decades of life experience. "This family has been nothing but polite and cooperative while being subjected to treatment that would make you sick to your stomach." Other passengers began murmuring agreement, some speaking up to confirm that they had witnessed harassment, rather than the disruptive behavior Patricia claimed. The narrative was beginning to crumble, but Patricia was too invested in her version of events to retreat. Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit again, this time with the grim expression of someone who wanted this situation resolved quickly and quietly. His priority was clearly getting the flight departed on time, rather than ensuring justice was served. "What's the holdup here?" Hayes demanded, his impatience obvious to everyone in the cabin. "We're already 15 minutes behind schedule and I've got connections to worry about in Boston." Patricia saw her opportunity to force a conclusion. "Captain, these passengers have been uncooperative throughout the boarding process. They've refused alternative seating arrangements, become verbally aggressive with crew members, and are now disrupting other passengers. I recommend immediate removal for flight safety." The recommendation hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus realized that Patricia was willing to destroy his family's dignity and traumatize his daughter rather than admit she had been wrong. The institutional power she wielded was about to crush them, and there seemed to be no way to fight back, without making the situation even worse. Marcus looked at his wife and daughter, seeing the exhaustion and confusion in their eyes. Zoe was trying not to cry, but her 8-year-old understanding of the world was being shattered by watching her parents treated like criminals for no reason she could comprehend. "Please," Zoe whispered, her small voice carrying across the silent cabin. "Can we just go home? I don't want to fly anymore." The heartbreak in her voice was audible to everyone within 20 rows, and Marcus felt something fundamental break inside his chest. He had built companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars, employed thousands of people, and owned the very airline that was humiliating his family. But in this moment, none of that mattered. He was just a father watching his daughter learn that the world could be cruel and unfair, and that sometimes there was nothing you could do to protect the people you loved from that cruelty. The decision Marcus made in the next few seconds would determine not just the outcome of this flight, but the future of everyone involved in this systematic display of discrimination and abuse of power. The terminal felt like a courtroom as the Wellington family found themselves once again surrounded by security personnel, this time facing official questioning about Patricia Whitmore's increasingly elaborate accusations. Airport security had established a private area where they could investigate the incident away from the growing crowd of passengers who had been recording the entire ordeal. "So let me understand this correctly," said Airport Security Supervisor Williams, a professional woman in her 50s who seemed genuinely interested in getting to the truth. "The flight attendant claims you were verbally aggressive, refused to follow crew instructions, and that your daughter was disruptive to other passengers. But multiple witnesses are saying something completely different." Marcus maintained his composure, while his phone buzzed continuously with urgent calls that he couldn't answer. The irony was devastating. His airline's executive team was trying to reach him for critical business decisions while he sat in security detention as a victim of his own company's discriminatory practices. Samantha had reached her breaking point. As a pediatric surgeon, she was accustomed to life-and-death pressure, but watching her daughter traumatized by systematic racism was pushing her beyond her limits. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she told Supervisor Williams. "We were discriminated against from the moment we approached the check-in counter. Every interaction was designed to humiliate us and justify treating us as second-class passengers." Meanwhile, Patricia was in another room providing her official statement, her story growing more elaborate with each retelling. She had now added claims that Marcus had threatened crew members and that Samantha had been uncooperative with safety procedures. Each lie built upon previous lies, creating a foundation of deception that would eventually collapse under its own weight. Young flight attendant Jessica Martinez was also being interviewed, and Marcus could see through the glass partition that she was struggling with her conscience. She knew the truth about what had happened, but Patricia's reputation for destroying the careers of subordinates who challenged her authority made speaking up a career-threatening decision. Captain Hayes was giving his statement with the confidence of someone who had never doubted that his crew's version of events would be accepted without question. He had 15 years of experience backing up his flight attendants, and he wasn't about to start questioning their judgment now, especially when it involved passengers who didn't fit his mental image of typical first-class travelers. Marcus finally answered one of his urgent business calls, stepping aside to speak with his airline's chief operations officer about a critical decision regarding route expansions. The conversation was surreal, discussing million-dollar business strategies while sitting in airport security detention as a victim of his own company's discrimination. "Marcus, we need your approval on the Boston route expansion immediately," the COO explained. "The board meeting is in 2 hours and we can't proceed without your sign-off. Also, there's been some kind of incident on one of our LAX flights that's starting to generate social media attention. Nothing serious, just some passenger service issue that got blown out of proportion." The passenger service issue was him. Marcus was learning about his own discrimination case secondhand, while his executives dismissed it as insignificant. The revelation was both infuriating and enlightening, showing him exactly how his company's leadership viewed complaints from minority passengers. "I'll handle the route expansion remotely," Marcus told his COO, "and I want a full report on that passenger service incident. Every detail, every policy that was followed or violated, every employee involved. This is now a top priority for me personally." Supervisor Williams returned with preliminary findings that validated everything the Wellington family had experienced. "Based on witness statements and cell phone recordings from other passengers, it's clear that you were subjected to treatment that violated multiple airline policies and possibly federal anti-discrimination laws. The claims made against you appear to be entirely fabricated." Mrs. Henderson had provided a particularly damning witness statement, describing in detail how she had watched Patricia systematically harass the family while inventing increasingly elaborate justifications for her behavior. Other passengers had corroborated her account, and several had provided video evidence that contradicted Patricia's official report. But Supervisor Williams also delivered frustrating news about the limitations of airport security's authority. "Unfortunately, we can't force the airline to honor your original seat assignments or compel them to provide the service you paid for. That's a civil matter between you and Skyline Airways. What we can do is document this incident for potential legal proceedings and ensure that false accusations aren't filed against you." Marcus was beginning to understand the full scope of the systemic problem he faced. Even when discrimination was obvious and well documented, the institutional mechanisms for addressing it were slow, limited, and often ineffective. Passengers who experienced this treatment had little recourse beyond filing complaints that would disappear into corporate bureaucracy. During the security investigation, Marcus used his laptop to begin his own comprehensive research into discrimination. Complaints at Skyline Airways. What he discovered was horrifying. Patricia Whitmore had been involved in at least 12 similar incidents over the past 3 years, always targeting minority passengers, always protected by management who dismissed complaints as misunderstandings or isolated incidents. Captain Hayes had a pattern of supporting discriminatory crew members, and Ground Supervisor Tom Bradley had multiple complaints from minority passengers spanning 5 years. The discrimination the Wellington family experienced wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic culture that his own leadership team had either ignored or actively enabled. The most devastating discovery was a series of email exchanges between Patricia and other crew members, where they discussed strategies for handling problem passengers using coded language that was transparently racist. These emails had been reported to Human Resources multiple times, but no meaningful action had ever been taken. Samantha was documenting everything on her phone, preparing for what she knew would be a lengthy legal battle. "Marcus, this can't stand. Even if we never fly again, other families shouldn't have to go through what Zoe experienced today. This has to have consequences." Marcus agreed, but he was also forming a much larger plan that his wife couldn't yet imagine. He wasn't just going to file a discrimination lawsuit. He was going to use his position as the airline's owner to fundamentally transform the entire company culture. Patricia Whitmore and everyone who had enabled her behavior were about to face consequences they couldn't possibly anticipate. What's the worst discrimination you've ever witnessed or experienced while traveling? Comment number 1 if you think Marcus should reveal his identity now and end this nightmare immediately. Or comment number 2 if you believe he should continue gathering evidence as a regular passenger. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because what Marcus discovers next will completely change how you think about airline discrimination. But here's what I want to know. How many other families do you think have suffered similar treatment while the airline's executives remained completely unaware of what was happening in their own company? 1 week later, Marcus Wellington stood in his Beverly Hills home office, surrounded by evidence that would destroy careers and transform an entire industry. The vacation to Martha's Vineyard had been postponed, but that week had been far from restful. Marcus had spent every waking hour conducting the most thorough investigation of his professional life, and what he'd discovered had shaken his faith in everything he thought he knew about his own company. The dining room table was covered with printed emails, witness statements, recorded phone calls, and legal documents that painted a picture of systematic discrimination that went far beyond Patricia Whitmore. His legal team had worked around the clock to prepare a case that would not only seek justice for his family, but establish precedents that would protect future passengers. "Marcus, are you absolutely certain about this plan?" Samantha asked, reviewing the strategy he'd outlined for their return trip. "Taking Zoe back into that environment, even with all these safeguards in place, feels like we're deliberately traumatizing her again." Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level, choosing his words carefully. Zoe had been remarkably resilient, but he could see the impact of their experience in the way she now asked nervous questions about every aspect of travel. "Sweetheart, sometimes when people do wrong things, the only way to make sure they can't hurt other families is to prove exactly what they did. Daddy has a plan to make sure that mean lady never treats anyone the way she treated us." The plan was elaborate and legally bulletproof. Marcus had coordinated with civil rights attorneys, aviation regulators, and media contacts to ensure that Patricia's next discriminatory incident would be documented from every possible angle and have immediate consequences. Hidden cameras, backup witnesses, and real-time legal support would capture evidence that no corporate bureaucracy could dismiss or ignore. What Patricia didn't know was that her commendation from Captain Hayes had been based on fabricated incident reports that violated federal aviation regulations. Her bragging to co-workers about putting those people in their place had been recorded by a flight attendant who was cooperating with Marcus's investigation. Every detail of her discriminatory pattern was now documented with legal precision. Marcus had also discovered that Tom Bradley, the ground supervisor who had supported Patricia's discrimination, was involved in a kickback scheme with airport vendors. Captain Hayes had multiple unreported incidents where his support for discriminatory crew members had violated company policies and federal regulations. The entire network of enablers was about to collapse simultaneously. The return flight was booked on the exact same route, with the exact same crew, at the exact same time. Marcus had ensured that Patricia and her accomplices had no idea they were walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would expose their behavior to the world and bring their careers to an immediate end. "This time will be different," Marcus promised his family. "This time everyone will see exactly what these people do to families like ours, and this time there will be immediate consequences that they can't escape or explain away." Samantha had initially been reluctant to subject their family to potential re-traumatization, but she'd come to understand that their experience was part of a much larger pattern that victimized families who didn't have their resources or legal sophistication. Other parents shouldn't have to watch their children learn that the world is cruel and unfair, she agreed. If we can stop that from happening to other families, then we have an obligation to act. The legal team had prepared multiple contingencies for every possible scenario. If Patricia attempted the same discrimination, they had real-time injunctions ready to file. If the airline tried to cover up the incident, they had federal regulators standing by to investigate. If management attempted to dismiss their complaints, they had media contacts ready to broadcast the story nationally. Marcus's phone rang with a call from his chief operations officer, who still had no idea that the discrimination victim from the previous week was actually the airline's owner. "Marcus, we've got a situation developing with that passenger service incident from last week. The family has hired some high-powered attorneys, and they're demanding meetings with senior management. Legal says we should probably settle this quietly before it becomes a bigger problem." "What exactly are they claiming happened?" Marcus asked, curious to hear how his own company's executives characterized their discrimination. "The usual stuff," the COO replied dismissively. "They're saying our crew discriminated against them because they're black, that they were treated differently than white passengers, the whole victim mentality playbook. Patricia Whitmore filed a detailed report showing they were uncooperative and disruptive, so we've got documentation that they were the problem, not us." The casual racism in his own executive's response was startling. Marcus realized that the discrimination his family experienced wasn't an aberration. It was a reflection of company culture that started at the top and filtered down through every level of operations. "I want to handle this personally," Marcus told his COO. "Schedule a meeting with the passengers for this afternoon, and I want Patricia Whitmore and Captain Hayes there to present their side of the story. If our crew members followed proper procedures, they should be comfortable defending their actions in person." The meeting was set for 2 hours before their return flight, creating a timeline that would expose Patricia's lies immediately before she had another opportunity to demonstrate her discriminatory behavior. Marcus was about to reveal his identity in the most devastating way possible, turning Patricia's moment of expected vindication into the end of her career. Zoe had spent the week asking thoughtful questions about fairness, justice, and why some people treated others badly because of how they looked. Her 8-year-old perspective had helped Marcus understand that this wasn't just about corporate policy or legal precedents. It was about the kind of world they were creating for the next generation. "Daddy, when we go back on the airplane, will the mean lady be nice this time?" Zoe asked, with the innocent hope of a child who still believed that people could change when they realized they were wrong. Marcus hugged his daughter tightly, knowing that she was about to witness a lesson in justice that would shape her understanding of right and wrong for the rest of her life. "Sweetheart, some people learn to be better when they face consequences for being mean. Tomorrow that lady is going to learn that being mean to families has very serious consequences." The Skyline Airways corporate conference room had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Patricia Whitmore sat confidently at the polished mahogany table, her 15 years of experience giving her the assurance that this would be just another routine defense of her professional judgment. Captain Hayes reviewed his notes with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his crew's version of events would be accepted without question. Chief Operations Officer David Chen had arranged the meeting expecting to handle a routine passenger complaint that could be resolved with minimal corporate liability. The airline's legal team was prepared to offer a modest settlement that would make the problem disappear without admitting any wrongdoing. "Before we begin," Chen announced to the room, "I want to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes, and anything said here may be used in potential litigation. We're here to get to the truth and find a reasonable resolution." Patricia straightened her uniform and prepared to deliver the performance of her career. She had refined her story over the past week, adding details that she believed would make her version of events unassailable. In her mind, she was about to be vindicated by corporate management, who would recognize her dedication to airline security and passenger safety. The passengers in question were problematic from the moment they approached the gate, Patricia began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed her own fabrications. They became aggressive when asked routine questions about their tickets, refused to cooperate with standard security procedures, and created a disturbance that threatened the safety and comfort of other passengers. Captain Hayes nodded in agreement, adding his own embellishments to support Patricia's narrative. "My crew member followed all proper procedures, and when the passengers became increasingly uncooperative, I made the decision to have them removed for flight safety. It was a textbook example of how to handle disruptive passengers. The airline's legal team took detailed notes, preparing their defense strategy based on the crew's statements. From their perspective, this looked like a routine case where minority passengers would claim discrimination, but ultimately have little evidence to support their allegations against experienced crew members with spotless records. "Thank you for those detailed reports," Chen said, checking his watch. "Now I'd like to bring in the passengers so they can present their version of events. I think you'll find their claims are somewhat exaggerated." The conference room door opened, and Patricia expected to see the same family she had successfully intimidated the previous week. Instead, she found herself looking at Marcus Wellington, but now he was dressed in an expensive business suit and carrying a briefcase that suggested he was far more than just another passenger with a complaint. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that immediately changed the energy in the room. "Thank you for arranging this meeting. I think there are some things we need to discuss about Skyline Airways' commitment to passenger rights and federal anti-discrimination laws." Patricia felt the first flutter of unease, but she pushed it aside. Passengers sometimes hired lawyers or brought advocates to these meetings. This didn't necessarily change anything about her position or the validity of her report. Marcus opened his briefcase and placed a stack of documents on the conference table. "Before we discuss last week's incident, I think everyone should know exactly who they're dealing with." He handed his business card to Chen, whose face went through a remarkable transformation as he read the information. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen announced in a voice that had suddenly become very quiet, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Wellington, the owner of Skyline Airways." The silence that followed was so complete that the air conditioning system seemed deafeningly loud. Patricia's confident expression crumbled as the reality of her situation began to penetrate her consciousness. Captain Hayes dropped his pen and stared at Marcus with the expression of someone watching his career dissolve in real time. "That's impossible," Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. You're just passengers. You can't be... This has to be some kind of mistake." Marcus pulled out his phone and placed a call that connected immediately. "David, this is Marcus. I'm sitting in conference room A with Patricia Whitmore and Captain Hayes. Could you please confirm my identity and authority to these employees?" He handed the phone to Chen, who had turned pale as the implications of the situation became clear. After a brief conversation, Chen hung up the phone and turned to face Patricia and Captain Hayes with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Ms. Whitmore, Captain Hayes, I can confirm that you are speaking with Marcus Wellington, the sole owner of Skyline Airways and the ultimate authority for all company operations and personnel decisions." Patricia's world was collapsing in real time. Every confident statement she had made, every lie she had told, every moment of smug satisfaction she had felt about putting those people in their place was now revealed as a career-ending display of discrimination against the person who could fire her with a single word. "Mr. Wellington," Patricia stammered, "there must be some misunderstanding. I was just following company procedures. Everything I did was by the book. I had no idea who you were, and that doesn't change the fact that your family was..." She couldn't finish the sentence because finishing it would require her to continue lying to the person who now controlled her future. Marcus opened his briefcase and began placing documents on the table with methodical precision. "Let me tell you what I discovered during my investigation into your by-the-book procedures, Ms. Whitmore. First, here are recordings of your conversations with co-workers where you bragged about putting those people in their place. Second, here are witness statements from passengers who recorded your behavior on their phones. Third, here are federal aviation regulations that you violated when you confiscated my phone and searched my wife's medical supplies without proper justification." Each document landed on the table like a nail in Patricia's professional coffin. Marcus continued with devastating calm. "Fourth, here are discrimination complaints from 12 other minority passengers over the past 3 years, all describing behavior identical to what you subjected my family to. Fifth, here are emails between you and other crew members discussing strategies for handling problem passengers using language that violates both company policy and federal law." Captain Hayes tried to distance himself from the situation. "Mr. Wellington, I want you to know that I had no idea about any patterns of discrimination. I was simply supporting my crew member based on the information she provided. if that information was inaccurate. "Captain Hayes," Marcus interrupted, "here are your performance reviews where supervisors noted your tendency to automatically support crew members without investigating passenger complaints. Here are incident reports where you backed discriminatory actions by crew members despite obvious evidence that passengers were being mistreated. And here are federal regulations requiring airline captains to ensure fair treatment of all passengers, regardless of race, which you violated when you supported Ms. Whitmore's actions." The legal team was frantically taking notes, realizing that their discrimination case had just become a corporate liability nightmare that could result in federal investigations, massive fines, and criminal charges against individual employees. Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the airport, where his planes were preparing for departure. "Ms. Whitmore, in 30 minutes, you were scheduled to work another flight. Instead, you're going to accompany me to that gate, where you're going to publicly apologize to my family and demonstrate to other passengers exactly what happens when Skyline Airways employees discriminate against passengers." Patricia's last, desperate attempt at self-preservation came out as a whispered plea. "Please, Mr. Wellington, I have 15 years with this company. I have a mortgage, a family to support. I made a mistake, but I can change. I can do better." Marcus turned back to face her with an expression that contained no sympathy for her situation. "Ms. Whitmore, you didn't make a mistake. You systematically discriminated against my family and then filed false reports to cover up your actions. You've done this to other families who didn't have the resources to fight back. Your 15 years of experience was 15 years of perfecting techniques for treating minority passengers as second-class citizens." The meeting was about to move to its final location, the same gate where Patricia had humiliated the Wellington family 1 week earlier, where she would now face the consequences of her actions in front of the same passengers and crew members who had witnessed her abuse of authority. The departure gate buzzed with the typical energy of travelers preparing for their evening flight. But today's boarding process would be unlike anything Skyline Airways passengers had ever witnessed. Marcus Wellington stood at the podium where announcements were made, flanked by his legal team, federal aviation officials, and members of the media who had been alerted to this unprecedented moment of corporate accountability. Patricia Whitmore stood beside him, no longer wearing her flight attendant uniform, but instead dressed in civilian clothes as an unemployed former airline employee facing potential criminal charges for filing false federal reports. Her 15-year career had ended exactly 60 minutes earlier when Marcus signed her termination paperwork in front of the same executives who had previously dismissed discrimination complaints as misunderstandings. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Marcus announced to the crowded gate area. "My name is Marcus Wellington, and I own Skyline Airways. 1 week ago, this woman subjected my family to systematic discrimination on this exact flight, then filed false reports claiming we were disruptive passengers. Today, she's here to face the consequences of those actions." The gate area fell silent as passengers pulled out phones to record what was clearly a historic moment. Social media feeds began filling with live streams of an airline owner publicly confronting discrimination within his own company, creating viral content that would reshape conversations about corporate responsibility across multiple industries. Patricia's public apology was delivered with the broken voice of someone whose world had completely collapsed. "I want to apologize to the Wellington family and to every passenger who witnessed or experienced the discrimination I displayed last week. My actions were wrong, unprofessional, and violated both company policy and federal law. I have no excuse for my behavior, and I accept full responsibility for the harm I caused." But Marcus wasn't finished with public accountability. Captain Robert Hayes was escorted to the podium by airport security, his pilot credentials permanently revoked by federal aviation authorities who had discovered his pattern of supporting discriminatory crew members. His 20-year career had ended when investigators found evidence that he had violated federal regulations requiring airline captains to ensure fair treatment of all passengers. Captain Hayes enabled and protected discriminatory behavior for years, Marcus explained to the assembled passengers. When airline employees abuse their authority, and when supervisors protect that abuse, it creates a culture where discrimination becomes systematic rather than isolated. That culture ends today. Ground supervisor Tom Bradley was already facing federal charges for the vendor kickback scheme that Marcus's investigation had uncovered. Jessica Martinez, the young flight attendant who had finally found the courage to speak truth about Patricia's behavior, stood beside Marcus wearing the supervisor's wings she had just earned through her promotion to senior crew member. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly passenger who had defended the Wellington family during their ordeal, was invited to address the crowd as the newest member of Skyline Airways' Passenger Advocacy Board. "What I witnessed last week was a disgrace to everything America is supposed to represent," she declared with the moral authority of her 80 years. "But what I'm seeing today gives me hope that justice still matters and that people in power can choose to do the right thing." The transformation of Skyline Airways was already underway. Marcus announced the implementation of revolutionary policies that would make his airline the industry leader in diversity, inclusion, and passenger rights. Every employee would undergo mandatory bias training. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination would result in immediate termination for any employee and criminal prosecution where federal laws had been violated. But the real change, Marcus explained, comes from recognizing that discrimination isn't just individual prejudice. It's institutional systems that allow prejudice to flourish without consequences. Today, those systems are being completely dismantled and rebuilt with accountability at every level. Samantha Wellington took the podium to announce the establishment of the Wellington Family Foundation for Aviation Equality, funded with $10 million to provide legal support for passengers who experienced discrimination and couldn't afford to fight back. "No family should have to choose between accepting injustice and risking financial ruin to pursue legal remedies," she declared. 8-year-old Zoe Wellington became the inspiration for Skyline Airways' new anti-bullying campaign when she asked the crowd a question that cut through all the corporate policies and legal procedures. "Why do some people think it's okay to be mean to other people just because they look different?" Her innocent question sparked a national conversation about how children learn prejudice and how adults can model better behavior. Federal aviation investigators announced that Patricia's case would become a precedent for prosecuting airline employees who filed false federal reports to cover up discrimination. Her criminal trial would send a message throughout the industry that discriminatory behavior would face serious legal consequences, not just corporate reprimands. The viral videos of Patricia's downfall generated millions of views across social media platforms, but the comments revealed something profound about public opinion. Overwhelming support for Marcus's actions came from passengers of all backgrounds who had experienced or witnessed similar discrimination but had never seen consequences. For airline employees who abused their authority, 6 months later, Skyline Airways had become the industry leader in customer satisfaction, diversity metrics, and employee accountability. Other airlines began implementing similar policies as investors and passengers demanded corporate responsibility for discriminatory practices. Marcus's courage to expose problems within his own company had sparked industry-wide reforms. Patricia Whitmore's unemployment and legal troubles served as a cautionary tale throughout the aviation industry. Her case was cited in congressional hearings on airline discrimination, and her criminal conviction for filing false federal reports established legal precedents that protected future passengers from similar abuse. The Wellington family's rescheduled vacation to Martha's Vineyard became a celebration of justice rather than an escape from trauma. Zoe spent the flight chatting with crew members who treated every passenger with equal respect and dignity, learning that most people are good when institutional systems support their better angels rather than enabling their worst impulses. As their plane descended toward Boston, Zoe looked out the window at the landscape below and asked her father a question that would stay with him forever. "Daddy, do you think that mean lady learned that being mean has consequences and that other people will learn from what happened to her?" Marcus hugged his daughter and reflected on the lesson they had all learned about the responsibility that comes with privilege and power. "I think she learned, sweetheart. But more importantly, other people learned that when someone with power sees injustice, they have a choice. They can ignore it and let it continue, or they can use their power to make things better for everyone." The story of Marcus Wellington and Patricia Whitmore became more than viral entertainment. It became a case study in corporate accountability racial justice, and the power of individuals to create institutional change. But perhaps most importantly, it became a lesson for children like Zoe about standing up for what's right, even when the costs are high and the outcome is uncertain. In the end, true power wasn't about wealth, position, or authority over others. True power was about using privilege to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, and creating systems where everyone's dignity was respected regardless of their race, background, or economic status. This powerful story teaches us that discrimination often thrives in silence, protected by institutional systems that prioritize corporate image over human dignity. Marcus Wellington's experience reveals how ordinary families face systematic prejudice that goes far beyond individual bias. The most important lesson is that people with privilege and power have a moral obligation to use their position for justice, not just personal gain. Patricia Whitmore's downfall demonstrates that discriminatory behavior always has consequences, even when those consequences are delayed. Her 15 years of experience became 15 years of perfecting harmful techniques that damaged countless families. The story shows us that bystander intervention matters tremendously. Mrs. Henderson's courage to speak up provided crucial support when the Wellington family felt isolated and powerless. Corporate accountability requires more than policy changes. It demands cultural transformation led from the top. Marcus learned that hands-off leadership allows toxic behavior to flourish unchecked. True change happens when leaders actively investigate, document, and eliminate discriminatory practices rather than dismissing complaints as misunderstandings. The story also highlights how children absorb lessons about justice and fairness from watching how adults respond to injustice. Zoe's innocence helped her parents remember that fighting discrimination isn't just about individual vindication. It's about creating a better world for future generations. Most importantly, this story proves that one person's courage to stand up against injustice can create ripple effects that transform entire industries and inspire others to demand accountability in their own communities. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have revealed your identity immediately, or gathered evidence like he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how businesses should handle employee discrimination. Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar treatment while traveling? Your stories matter and could help others feel less alone. If this story opened your eyes to the reality of discrimination in customer service, please hit that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear this message. Subscribe for more incredible true stories about justice, courage, and standing up for what's right. Share this video with friends and family who believe in equality and accountability.